Loading.
Okay, now it says recording on my end as well. Yes, yes.
All right. And hello, everyone. Welcome to a discussion of Universalism with Antiochian Greek Orthodox theologian and philosopher Robert Fortuin. Robert is a contributor to Father Al Kimmel's blog, Eclectic Orthodoxy. He's an extremely friendly fellow. He's from the Netherlands, definitely has that sense of Dutch charm. So that'll be my introduction for him. But Robert, will you introduce yourself to your listeners and maybe a bit about how you came across the larger hope and maybe what it means to you on a practical level?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So I'm first of all very thankful to you, Christopher, to having me on, and I'm just looking forward to the conversation. This topic of universalism is very it's kind of a wide, broad topic, and sweeping. It can be theologically, philosophically, but it's really good to talk about that and asking questions. I think this is what that's what this is all really about. But yeah, my journey to universalism has been through studies. I mean, as an Orthodox Christian, I think uh, the greater hope, if we want to call that, is kind of center to liturgy, right? The Paschal triumph, Christ trampling down death by death is something very central to the Orthodox liturgy, and so I was confronted with that as a Christian about, well, what does that really mean? Is Christ's triumph, is it merely, is it just symbolic? Is it conditional? Is it absolute? What does it really mean? And if it's just merely symbolical or figuratively or conditional or partial, only for certain people, some that can measure up, then, well, why and by what standard? And how do we then have to reinterpret all the hymnography and the theology? And through my studies at the University of St. Andrews, studying the patristics and being exposed to the theology of Gregory of Nyssa, I think really brought me into that kind of stream of thinking about these issues. Gregory of Nyssa is just wonderful in terms of his theological vision of mankind, of not just a narrow view of salvation, individual salvation, but much more for him. It's this kind of wide picture of humanity. In fact, he puts it so beautifully. He says that for him, mankind is not really complete. Humanity is really not created until every person is brought into the all in all of God. And so that it's either everybody gets saved or nobody gets saved, and it's just a very beautiful picture, and in reinforcing the gospel account of the triumph of Christ over death. And so I've studied patristics both at the University of St. Andrews as well at the University of Aberdeen, both in Scotland. I did my studies, my master's on St. Clement of Alexandria, and then my PhD level work on St. Gregory of Nyssa, and particularly his use of analogy, how that plays a role, both the apophatic type of predication of God, and then also the cataphatic, the affirmation, where the apophatic is kind of the negation. But it plays a very big role in his theology, and so I focused on that, and it's just very beautiful to see early Christians just delving into these deep issues. And I think really our lives are a continuation of that. Or I aspire to have my life to be a continuation of that.
That's very good. Just from our interactions previously, I'd have to say that there were elements of your story that reminded me very much of Solovyov and Bulgakov. Just that clash of just the total lack of values in a world without God and without mystery.
Right.
And moving from that into the rich tradition of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. I see some parallels there, and I think they would be good ones, personally.
Right. Yeah, that's well put.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, in terms of discussion points, I know one question that I was curious about based on some of your writings on eclectic orthodoxy. You wrote a
Yeah.
really good article that sort of compared Neopalamism to the
Mm.
doctrine of eternal hell, and you were arguing pretty forcefully, I felt, that both of them sort of separate. They kind of turn God into the Wizard of Oz. You can't really
Right.
know him because he's so
Right.
at odds with what you're actually experiencing. Either,
Yes.
some energies that are less than his essence, or this really profoundly disturbing doctrine of last things.
Right.
Um, so I was curious, from your perspective, what's really writing on this? Like, if somebody is less than a forthright universalism, what is lost from your perspective?
Mm.
That would be a very interesting one for me personally.
Yeah.
Like,
That.
what's writing on this? I think would be my question.
Right. That's a great question. I think there's a lot riding on it. And I think, as a preface to this, I think one has to understand that, at least for me, that it's not primarily a philosophical approach. It is more of a doxological approach. It is the question: is it possible? Can God be glorified finally and truly? And when I say finally, I mean in the whole larger picture of creation, from the beginning to the end. Um, can God be glorified if one of his single creatures made in his image is permanently lost, is permanently locked in a state of damnation? And I think so that is the question that I think is kind of the root, that is kind of the foundation. And I start out with that as a way of kind of orienting myself in terms of how to approach these questions. So when you ask what is at stake, I would say, well, what's at stake is, in a way, it's the gospel. The moral character of God, is it truly revealed by Christ? Is it truly revealed to us? Can we truly know what God is like, what his moral character is? And then also the question of the revelation of again of who God is, but can we truly know that? So I think this is very important. So then we're going back to the liturgy. I think the liturgy, the Christian liturgy, confronts us with that question: can God really be glorified? So that question, to me, is really, really important. So what is at stake? I say the gospel. I say what is at stake is the moral character of God. And so those are some high stakes, I think. But again, it's not approached from a purely philosophical approach. It's more of a question of, how do we give an account of God's goodness in the light of we get confronted with pure evil, right, in our lives. This is not trivial. So I think there is this tension in our faith. There's a tension of the goodness of God on the one hand, the salvation in Christ, the revelation of the Son of God coming to the world, saving, dying for the world, and yet we see this, tremendous, horrific evils that continue, and so we have to somehow settle with that, or at least we have to grapple with that, and I think that is really at stake. How do we answer that question? Can we glorify God if it turns out that ruin is permanently part of the final picture, right? Now I'm talking about eschatological finality. We're talking about into eternity. Is this somehow a failure that is at the root of God's plan for creation? Because I think it's really easy for people to say. I think it's easy to say, well, God reacted to sin, the fall, and so we had then to kind of make these amend to it, this change, and then He accommodates it. But I don't think we can get away with that. I don't think, if God is truly all powerful and all knowing, that accommodation is not the word. It has to be part of His eternal purposes that He already knew. Before God created, He already knew what the outcome would be. And if that outcome is the failure, if the permanent ruin or annihilation of people, right, people in his image, then I think then it turns out that that would be part of God's purposes, of God's eternal purposes and desire for creation. And I think that really puts the question of can God be glorified, really puts that in a very, it really pressures that. So yeah, that's what I think is at stake.
Yeah, like you said, very high stakes. I thought in David Bentley Hart's book, that's getting to be a classic. That's getting a little old. I mean,
Right.
2019, I think.
Yes.
And then COVID hit, probably to handicap him or something, right?
It's
Keep people
true.
from
Yeah.
posting too much. No, I don't know. But
Right.
that's a beautiful book, by the way, for
It
listeners.
is.
Yeah,
It
it's,
is.
it's it's a personal favorite of mine for sure. But
Yes.
something I thought Hart did very beautifully is sometimes you'll see this sort of stock. I almost want to call it sentimental, but sometimes you'll see this stock claim that
Right.
people who believe in eternal hell make, where they're like, well, Chesterton kind of does this.
Yeah.
The great Dominican Thomas Joseph White does this, believe it or
Mm.
not. But they'll be like, the idea of an eternal hell undergirds our decision making with profound seriousness. And
Yes. Yes.
without this, you can't really make sense of the weight of life or like its dignity and gravity.
Right.
And
Right.
I really like the way Hart addressed that in his
Yeah.
book. He said something to the effect of, it's really hard to imagine moving forward and having a sense of positive meaning of life if any are lost. Like
Yes. Yes.
I've
Yes.
heard, I've heard Jordan Daniel Wood say similar things. He says like many of his students, um, this is like their big thing. They're like, how can I
Yeah.
glorify? How can I worship God if
Yes. Yes.
He imposes or permits, by virtue of his, like you said, foreknowledge and such things.
Right. Right.
There's sort of a question: how does this play out? So I think you very nicely speak to those concerns and thoughts.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think Gregory of Nyssa is again really speaks to this, and that's his theology of participation in the divine life, and especially how he puts it. He uses a term epektasis, and that word has the meaning of stretching forth, stretching out, and he uses that to explain that the participation in God isn't always reaching for more, truly attaining, but there's always more. By the very fact that God is infinite, his depths cannot be plumbed. Right, there is no end to the beauty and goodness and the depth of God in His being, and so there is this sense of like there was always more. But it's not frustration. It's not like, oh, I don't, I can't get what I can't get what I need. No, it's not that. You are truly satisfied, but yet the desire is even more intensified. So I think that speaks to the question that people have of if you're a universalist and you believe that everything just kind of pans out, well then why even be a Christian, or why even concern yourself about religion or faith or what have you, right? Why even do good? Why, those kind of things, and it can border on absurdity, of course. But I think the impulse, that question is a good question. It's not trivial. I mean, it is a good concern. But I think Gregory of Nyssa shows how that it can be answered, how that is actually the Christian life is one draws in more, not because we've kind of reached an end, or we've got what we're looking for. Hey, I'm saved, or something like that, which is a false picture, anyways, right? That somehow we got the ticket to heaven, and now boom, it's done. Let me get on with life. No, no, no. So there is this sense that that intensification, this epektasis, this stretching forward because of because your desire now your life has come turned on, if you will, right? The intensity of the goodness of God, the beauty of God, the love of God, that one wants more of that. And I think this starts in this life. It does not have to start at the afterlife. It does not have to start in the eschaton. It is meant for us to start right here. And I think we can see that in the lives of the saints, right? The people have been affected by a change, by the living God, by life, by beauty, by love, by light, and they cannot unsee it. They cannot do away with it. They want more because it is love. It is what they were created for, right? And so I think we see that in the best of the Christian tradition, and I think that's God's will for all of us, for everyone. And I think it's a beautiful picture of salvation, that this is actually becoming more fully human, becoming truly human. And so this is a picture then also of salvation, of being healed, right? Of now coming, one's life comes into focus, that now one is now kind of, one's orientation is slowly, for sure, and partially reorients itself, right? Is reoriented towards God. And I think, that's a beautiful picture. So I think really, if one thinks that universalism is kind of lets people off the hook, or that it is merely as kind of a sentimental thing. Okay, we're saved, everybody's good, no worries about, people who have died or whatnot. Let's just get on with it. I think that's a very kind of a false picture of what universalism is. But I also think it's a very false picture of what Christianity is, of what faith is, period, in God. So I think, again, Gregory can be a real good guide in that respect.
That's excellent. I resonate very much with that answer. What I would want to add to that is something that I share with Jordan Daniel Wood. I've mentioned him. He's the author of The Whole Mystery of Christ, kind of up and coming Roman Catholic, Greek patristic scholar. But he's best known for his internet universalism. So he's a great guy. I really look up to him. Something I share with him is he has the sense that, to use like sort of Roman Catholic John Henry Newman style terms here, he thinks that there needs to be a development of doctrine on loss, on damnation, hell. I agree with him. And I think something you're pointing to is there are these old stock objections to universalism.
Right.
And I think, academic maturity, my 2 cents would be that whatever one's position is, you should be willing to hear out alternatives.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily need to be patient with silly objections, right?
Right.
So what you want to do, I think, and I really enjoy these discussions between, both sides or whatnot. I think the best participants in this discussion, in my opinion, what they're really good at is, and I think of like Tom Talbot or Eric Rayton when I say this, I think they're both, and you strike me this way too, but they're really good at drawing out the strongest formulations of the alternative position, not necessarily because they think it's plausible. I mean, we all privately have our opinions about what's plausible and what not, but they're just really good at drawing out the best of the other side so that they present their own position on its strongest foot.
Right. Yes.
It's almost like maybe a sense of chivalric honor. It's like you don't want to just beat the loser knight. Like you want to be strong, like in the World Cup. You want to be the strongest team. You don't want to just, I don't know who the team would be.
Right.
But So
I think that really resonates with me. I think there's a certain humility that comes paired with that, and I also think that one has to understand that objections are not there because they're just trivial, or they can just be swept under the rug or dismissed casually. I think these are real concerns. These are very real concerns when we're talking about evil and suffering. My goodness, I think you mentioned Jürgen Moltmann, and I think his position is he brings up the contention, that universalism can easily become an accommodation of additional suffering to the victims, right? So here we are, kind of heaping, coals on the victims of perpetrators, So, and I think that's a very powerful. It's an example of, I think, an objection to universalism that has to be met on. It has to be, you have to sit on that, if you will, right? You have to kind of, really, take that as in all humility as a true concern, and I think it is. And ultimately, then, these kind of questions about salvation and universalism, again, it's really about truth. To me, the polemics that don't play, this doesn't play a role. I could care less. What I care about is the truth. I care about love. I care about the gospel. I care about what Christ has done, and I want to understand that. I want to understand it rightly. I want to understand God rightly, right? The Trinity. I want to understand. I don't want to misrepresent God. And so I take these things very seriously. And so I think this is very important. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think Jordan Wood does a great job also, like you said, to really consider, the depth of evil and what it does, and then also to say, well, how do we understand? How do we answer that? I think David Bentley Hart does a good job as well, but he approaches it more, kind of strictly philosophical, and sometimes he can come over as kind of impatient. He's at another level, right? But I think, nonetheless, I think he does approach it because he does care about these answers. I don't think he dismisses sometimes it may appear that he does. I think it's more of a rhetorical strategy, and sometimes it's also because I think, some of these objections, like, kind of like you said, these old objections, you go like, okay, well, this is just silliness, and one can get impatient with that. But the true objections, I think, are really worth grappling with and answering and finding good answers. I happen to believe that universalism is the only way to answer these questions when everything is said and done. But it's certainly not because papering over issues or problems like that. Let's face these problems so that we can answer them, and at least find a way to answer them. So I think this is, again, going back to what's at stake. I think there's so much at stake. If this was just kind of a ivory tower discussion about some technical issues or something like that, then I'd say, well, who cares? Or we can talk about it, but there's not much at stake. I don't think this is one of those kind of issues. There's a lot at stake.
Yeah, I think so. And I certainly think that just the way that let's call it the majority historical view, that, there is an eternal hell, I think the emotional impact that has on people.
Yes.
And Hart mentions this, especially young children. I think
absolutely.
That's the sign that maybe something's wrong. It's worth looking into, at least.
Yes.
I would tend to say. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point. And I believe it's because at the kind of root of it, is at this foundation of it, is that we're saying contradictory things about God. God loves. We say on one hand, he came to save us, right? God, his son, sent his son to save the world. But then, and so we believe that. But then we start heaping up all these conditions, right? We're saying, well, it's only good for some people. You have to measure up, and there's different levels of culpability, but God only accepts certain levels, and none of these are really kind of answered. It's this kind of becomes a dogmatic point, and dogma, it can be very helpful, but it can also really kind of be used to. It can be used to use as a way of dismissing counterpoints, and that can be very difficult. That can be very harmful, because then people are really told, well, just don't, just stop thinking, just accept it as dogma, and then I think that's what happens. Then you have this kind of root that is gnawing at people, and this contradiction, and that I think there's harm in that, to children, to adults. How are we to make of this? What kind of God is this really that we really believe in? And a lot of people are deconstructing because of that. I think that they're saying, I love God, I believe in Christ, but the way organized religion has come down, it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense that God would condemn the Buddhist, or my grandma, or the neighbor, or whatever, or even worse, innocent children, those that have not even been born. We're told by some that they're burning in hell,
No,
and
yeah,
it's crazy.
absolutely. No, I was looking into the St. George Mivart affair. I hadn't heard of it before Al, so another shout out to Father Al for finding
Okay,
such
yes,
interesting content.
right.
But I was shocked at the responses that
Mm,
some of the priests would write to
yes.
Mivart.
Mm,
It was just shocking. I mean, just to give you an
yeah.
example that I thought was horrific. Mivart was saying, well, for Roman Catholic medieval thought, we believe in the limbo of the infants,
Right.
and the limbo of the infants, Aquinas says that it's a lovely place. You might
Yeah.
call it heavenly, like a minor heaven or something,
Right.
right?
Right. 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 Right.
And then like you get these Jesuits from Ireland like writing
Mm,
back in columns being like, it is a known truth of faith that infants suffer. And for example, they suffer on earth. So why
right.
should they suffer later too? And I'm just like,
Wow.
this is
Yeah.
monstrous balderdash. This is
Yes.
like one of the
Yes.
best
Yes.
arguments I've ever read
Yes.
against being
Right.
a
Right.
Christian.
Right.
Like
Right.
it's
Right.
just it's
Right.
so I think something I don't like that I observe sometimes in
Yeah.
universalism debates
Yeah.
is people kind of gaslight universalists, and they're like,
Right.
oh well, the majority tradition isn't actually that morally obtuse. Like they're sensitive to moral concerns.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like, yeah, but a depressingly large number of them don't really feel like it.
Right.
Like
Right.
Jordan Wood and David Hart, they talk a lot about Fulgentius of Ruse, and he
Yes.
has this line about like a baby dying before he hits the font, and then a baby getting the font, and they both die, and then
Oh
one of
goodness.
them's in. Right, I know. It's just
Right.
like,
Yes.
and I have autism, so I can say this, I think, but I just think about the autism involved
Yeah.
in like a
Right. Right.
sermon like
Right.
that. It's
Right.
Hart's. It's like
Yeah.
Hart. He talked about it on a podcast once. He's like, "Well, dear God, what the hell am I hearing?" But I mean,
Right.
that's how it
Yeah.
strikes me as well. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
think
Yes.
that something valuable Jordan Wood has said is doctrine is developing. It has developed.
Yes.
The
Yes.
questions are just what are the limits. So the idea that we can't touch this one, we can't modify it,
Yes.
that's just not true, even on a
Right.
historical level. The
Yes.
question is what modifications are possible. It's
Right.
not
Right.
will modification happen. Like nobody
Right.
believes the traditional doctrine
Yes.
today,
Yes.
except for
Yeah.
maybe like 3 evangelical Calvinists in St. Paul. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. 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 Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think this is, as Eastern Orthodox, I think we're in a little bit of a better position, at least in the sense that there's no official dogmatic pronunciation, or I mean, there's no dogmatic teaching on eternal hell, right? On the eternal, enduring, damnation. So now, it doesn't mean that it's, I don't want to paint a picture and say that Orthodoxy is universalist. It's not. There is a very large and strong contingent within Orthodoxy that holds to eternal hell. But I think when you really look at it, I mean, there's just there is very little bit officially said about it. It's there is just very little on it. And if you look at what is believed and what is practiced in terms of the liturgy and the prayers and the hymns, it's there. overwhelmingly universal in scope. It really is amazing. So I think, but for Catholics, of course, it's a little bit different. I think what's the Lateran Council, I think, dogmatically, added the eternal damnation, if I'm not mistaken. So it makes it a bit more difficult, I think, for Catholics, and maybe that's also why Jordan perhaps is really having to lean against that. But I think he's right. I think he's right that, and even for in Orthodoxy, there's this thing, that floats about. It's this kind of well, Orthodox, we don't change, or doctrine doesn't change, and I think that's the same kind of traditionalist type of mistake that is made, that somehow that doctrine doesn't change, and that's not true. It does change when you look at how things have changed. Even just kind of the history on the ecumenical councils will bear witness to that. How things changed and were clarified and changed back, and then all these kind of things. And I think and just also in practice and teachings, and so to kind of set that in stone, I think that's really kind of what I would call a power move. It's kind of a sleight of hand, almost. It's kind of like, well, we're just going to pronounce this as as set in stone, and conversation is over. And I think that historically, it's just not tenable. That position is it is nothing but a power move. And
no, it is interesting the way, like, and Father Al talks a lot about this, but the way the Fifth Ecumenical Council is remembered, and the storytelling about it, and the way it gets sort of mythologized,
right?
And really, like, the according to modern scholars like Norman Tanner, the Fifth Ecumenical Council is the Synod of 553 proper.
Yeah.
And that council didn't discuss apocatastasis, aka universalism, at all.
Right.
So it's when he has his 21, his 2-volume Decrees of the Councils. Norman Tanner doesn't even include any of them.
Yeah. Right. Rightly so.
Like,
Yes. There's a lot of odd things that happen, unusual things that happen with that council. None of the notes, none of the notes of the actual meetings mention the condemnation of universal apocatastasis at all. It's not why the council was convened. It was not about that issue. And so it's just a lot of odd things, and then we see kind of this appendage of like these these condemnations and it's an origin, and it's like, well, wait a minute, why did that get in there? It's a really kind of a strange question. Now we do know that there was a controversy there between warring monks, if we can
the Tall Brothers of Egypt or something. Right. I don't remember.
Yeah, well, there's two factions of monks in Palestine, Palestinian monks, and they were at odds about what Origen taught, and so this created a big conflict for the Emperor Justinian. He had to deal with it because they were just riling up everybody about this issue, and it was creating dissension and problems, and they were accusing each other, and they were basically ready to go at war over it. And it's just very interesting. And so, but what is so remarkable that it's actually not Origen's teachings, but actually what they taught about Origen. So it's kind of like this it's like, again, this is some 300 years after Origen. This is not like within his lifetime. This is 300 years removed, some 300 years removed, and they're teaching that, well, Origen taught this, and this is what that means, and no, this is not what he means. And so that's what this controversy was about. But Justinian just lumps it all in, or at least the appendage does. It's not in the actual notes of the council. This is not why they came why it was convened to begin with. So it's all very unusual. But like you said, Father Kimmel has a really good series on that. Also in his book, I think he has an entire chapter dedicated to it. So for viewers that want to find out more about the details on this, I can highly recommend Father Kimmel's series. It's on eclectic orthodoxy, and it's very, very worthwhile. Yeah.
I could second those recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
One question I definitely wanted to get to
Okay.
was one of the interesting things to me about David Bentley Hart's book when it came
Yes.
out
Yeah.
was the vitriol and the negative reviews. That was really remarkable
Yes.
to me. But then
Yes.
second, and like you said, Hart is on another level. So I freely acknowledge that. I'm sure I don't understand him. I'm sure I don't. He's a very, very learned individual.
Yes.
He felt that there were no critics who understood his arguments. And as I went back and forth between his book,
Yeah.
critics would say what he would say back.
Right.
I felt like he was right.
Yes.
But then it kind of begged my question, and I guess I have to say the embarrassing fact that I'm not a Universalist now. So there we go. You can
Yeah.
maybe in my epectasis, if I make it that far, maybe I'll learn one day.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but I'm like, I wonder if I understand his argument, because I'm like, I don't want to
Yeah.
not understand it. So
Right.
I'll tell you what I think it is, and then why don't you tell me if I'm
Okay.
missing something? Does
Yeah.
that work?
Yes. Yes.
I think his argument is that the final state, so like eschatology, the final state is also the purpose, so the final cause of creation from nothing.
Yes.
And so whatever the final state contains is an absolute revelation of God's moral character.
Yes.
And so if that final state contains evil on some level, especially a tremendous evil, not just like the evil of, say, missing a finger, so I have to live through eternity with, you know, 4 fingers, right? I mean, not like that, like a tremendous evil, like missing out on the best reality there is, namely, you know, participation in God. So if it contains that, then it reveals that God does contain an element of evil.
Yes.
And then wouldn't be God, which
right.
So I know that his position in Meditation 1 is a solid 30 pages. And I just said maybe 2 sentences, so obviously I can't fully represent it. But do you think I have the gist, or do you think I'm missing something? What would you, add to that? Maybe that would be my question. Yeah. What do you?
Yeah. I mean, I think you put your finger on something very important. You know, that you know, the first cause, right? The reason for creation is the final cause. You wouldn't start building a home unless you already know what you're, you know, the final cause is the home, and that's the reason for your first cause, right? I mean, and so that's kind of, we can kind of use that in this picture of God's, you know, first cause, if you will, for creating. And why is he creating? Is he just creating just to kind of see what happens or whatever? No, it is actually, he has a vision for it, and that's the final cause. So yes, and that kind of goes back to, you know, to why he creates, right? So I think that is definitely part of Hart's argument, and it is quite powerful, I'd say.
Part of it. I think, what are the other parts you think?
So I think more specifically in Meditation 1, it's an argument about the orientation of the will. So and so that that all of creation is oriented to God, and that what the human will is by definition, constitutively, is oriented towards the good, towards God, and that to violate that orientation is to actually go counter to what you really are created for. You actually become less human, if you want to use that language. It's actually going against what you are called to be, or what you're really intended to be. It's going, you know, it's like your own undoing, and it's irrational as in that sense, because it's not what you were created for, and your orientation is towards the good, and yet you are choosing something that's not. And so it's actually a devolution into non-being if one would persist in that. What Hart's argument there is that one cannot persist in choosing non-being over the good into eternity forever, because that would basically be contributing to your own undoing. And that is not what freedom is. That is actually what we would call bondage, right? It would be insanity, right? It goes against what you are, right? And so I think that's really meditation one is about that. So, and I think it's also the argument, and you mentioned that as well, but the argument that, and also the moral character of God, right? That God's will is because as the good, he is the source of that goodness. And so again, as the telos, as the purpose for our creation is himself, to not choose him then is to devolve into non-being. It is then to actually go again. And what Hart's point is that it's going against your nature. It's going against your freedom, against your constitution as a human made in the image of God. And that is just simply irrational. It's incoherent, is what his point is. It's just basically you end up with an incoherent picture of what freedom is. If freedom is just arbitrary, that there is no telos, there is no orientation, then how would you differentiate that from just an arbitrary event? I think he used the example of an aneurysm or something like that, right? That's not a free choice. That's not freedom. There's no will in that. Right, and so I think he's very powerful. It's a very powerful argument. And I think it comports with our human experience. And his point is that you cannot not choose. You cannot not set your will to something. It's a very odd thing, right? It's a very odd thing about our experience. And the objection is as well, I can choose something bad. Yes, that's an approximate end under the guise of goodness.
Exactly.
But it's not the good. And as such, then it is a devolution. It's devolving into non-being if one were to persist. Right.
Right.
But it's not possible to persist because it's going against human nature to do so. And it's
right.
And so that I think that hopefully there, I think I'm doing justice to it, but I think that's what Hart is really arguing in Meditation 1, and I think it's very powerful. And by the way, he's not coming up with anything new. This is not him coming up with something new. This an ally is Thomas Aquinas, Saint Thomas Aquinas,
cool.
right? He calls it the bonum in communi. It's the orientation of the soul, the orientation of the will to the good, bonum in communi. That is, it's very powerful. And where did Aquinas get that from? He got that from, it came through St. John of the Damascus. It came from Maximus. It came from Dionysius. It came from the Cappadocians. So it's a long line there. So it's not something that Hart just kind of came up with as a, kind of a novel construct. I think this is it's really at the heart. The heart of the Christian tradition when it comes to anthropology. It is squarely a Thomistic anthropological keystone, if you will. And so I think that is what Hart is doing in Meditation 1. And I think it's very powerful. And it is also powerful, again, because we see it. You can see it in Gregory of Nyssa. And I talk about Nyssa a lot, but it's because I focused my doctoral work on there. Nyssa has that same picture. It has that same picture, that orientation, that epektasis, right? That stretching forth. That's not just a random stretching forth to an arbitrary point. It is to the Trinity. It is to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It is to the source, the you know the good, right? It is to goodness and to the good. It is to that, and again, you can find that early on in the patristics. So again, this is just, I think that all the more makes Hart's argument so powerful, because he draws from a long tradition. And I think, yeah, I've read a lot of reviews of that all shall be saved, and um, those that disagree with him, I have not found any really good, where you say, well, this is wow, he hadn't thought about that, or okay, David didn't cover that, or something like that. And some unfortunately are vitriolic. I don't know why. It's very kind of strange.
Yeah,
And unfortunate.
I don't like saying only bad things about other people, but
Yeah.
I'm willing to do that here for just a moment, and it will be tempered with praise. But I really liked Michael J. McClymonds' History of Universalism,
Yes. Yes.
but I liked it as history.
Mm.
I
Yes.
really hated it as philosophy and theology.
Right. Right.
And in
Right. Right.
theory,
Yes.
I'm on his team. Like I'm not a universalist, just to be
Right.
transparent, but like
Right. Right.
his arguments against universalism that he levels are so bad
Yeah.
that
Right.
I
Right.
think that if the only thing I knew about the controversy was what he said, I would have to
Right.
choose the universalist side.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And I mean, I hate saying something mean about him, but I'll
Yeah.
say something nice about him.
Yeah.
Jordan Wood had classes with him. Jordan thinks he's
Mm.
an incredibly sharp guy. Jordan really
Mm.
respects
Yes.
him.
Yes. Yes.
Roberto Della Noval, another Roman Catholic
Yes.
Universalist,
Yes.
he wrote a very positive review of McClymonds' book.
Right.
Even David
Right.
Bentley Hart, he said it was
Yes.
clearly a very passionate work of labor. He worked very hard on it, and
Yeah.
that should be acknowledged. So,
Right. Right.
um,
Right.
and I think McClymonds a good guy. I
Yeah.
guess I just would have expected more nuance from someone who studies Jonathan Edwards, because I'll just
Right.
say, like, my top two Protestant theologians as a Roman Catholic myself are Jonathan
Yeah.
Edwards and Karl Barth.
Yeah.
I think as
Yes.
far as the Protestant tradition goes, and
Yeah.
you, you're you're an American by immigration. I
Yes.
was born
Yes.
born here, and
Yeah.
Jonathan Edwards was an American theologian.
Yes.
I just draw a connection to Father Al. Al really likes Robert Jensen, and
Right.
Jensen wrote a classic review, a recommendation of Jonathan Edwards. It's a
Yes.
book
Yes.
called America's Theologian.
Mm. I
And it
recall
just
that.
kind of
Yes.
kills me that someone who studies Jonathan Edwards, who's one of the
Right.
great speculative geniuses of
Right.
Protestantism,
Right.
he basically independently derived Berkeleyan idealism. He independently derived Freudian psychology.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Right.
you
Right.
could
Right.
study that man as your focus and then
Yes.
just demonstrate. And I don't want to be too mean, but I mean, I
Yeah.
just don't think McClymond even respects the speculative enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like, how
Oh.
do you come to that as a scholar of Edwards?
Yeah. I'm not
I don't want to be
sure.
mean, but it's baffling to me, just transparently.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's also, David Hart. He came down pretty hard on, he came hard at
Yeah, yeah, I
McClymond,
read that
right?
one.
And I think so. I think what is kind of probably objectionable, that I think what David found so problematic is that McClymond was kind of saying, well, it's kind of like guilty by association, that universalism,
Yes.
repeatedly co-traveled, if you will, with the heterodox, and the heterodox who diverged on things like the Trinity or Christology, and then therefore this is also heterodox, and that's just I mean it's just like not engaging with the argument. And I think if there's anything that upsets David, is that if you don't engage with what he actually is promulgating. I mean, what he's arguing, right? So if he's arguing about X and you're you're arguing against him with Y, then it's like, wait a minute, I'm here. This is what I'm doing. You're talking to me about that, and yeah, that can come over as disrespectful or just plain up. He's just like, what's going on? And I think that's kind of what happened with McClymond. I don't know what McClymond's position is or how he got there or what's going on with him. I don't really know him, but yeah, it is definitely odd. One would hope that scholars would engage on the arguments, on the very, these kind of the center of the claims that are made, and then go and then talk about these and say, well, what do you mean by this? Why? Well, this truly hold up. But I have not seen that, and I really think it is, and of course you can disagree with us universalists, but you have to engage with the arguments made. Otherwise, you're like tilting at windmills. You're just, it's like, it's kind of like a straw man that are people putting out there. And it's really unfortunate, because why is it unfortunate? Not because of the disagreement. I think it's unfortunate because the conversation is not continued, because we're not learning. Nobody's learning anything. If we're speaking against each other and we're accusing and the polemics fly and all of that, to me, it's counterproductive. I really don't want anything to do with it.
No, I totally relate to that.
It's not my project, and I'm not accusing McClymond of bad intentions or anything like that. But it's just unfortunate how a lot of these critics came out, and many of them are just, they're just clearly not understanding Hart. They're and make a caricature of his position or false accusations, or and that I imagine is upsetting to Hart, and so yeah.
He has a lot of health problems too. He almost died at one point,
Yeah,
I think,
he did.
in 2017 or something. Which
yes.
he I read somewhere online that he has to use voice to text for his Substack because his neck hurts, so he can't bend over and type.
Oh wow.
So he stands at a desk.
Yes.
And he can dictate.
Oh my goodness.
Voice to text. That's something I read somewhere. I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
You can imagine I'd probably be pretty cranky if I were like that, and
right.
He's a lot less cranky than I would be, I think.
Well, yeah, I think he got, there was again, I don't know him personally, but my understanding is that he went through quite a health scare there, and it was for a prolonged period of time, several years, I think. But I think he's come out of that, come through that, and I wish him all the best. And so yeah.
Right. I like him, and I guess just to elaborate on my own position a bit, I'm actually not opposed to universalism. Have you ever heard the Karl Barth quote? It says, "I don't teach universalism, but I don't not teach universalism." Have you ever heard that quote?
No, I have not. No.
That's my style. So I'm pretty
right.
Some scholars think von Balthasar, Hans von Balthasar.
Yes.
Roman Catholic, who wrote the book Dare We Hope.
Yes.
Some scholars think von Balthasar and Karl Barth are being cheeky when they say that they aren't really universalists, and they think really they actually are, and they're just being modest.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily, whether they were or not isn't really material to my feelings. I basically just take them at face value when they say they're not. I'm like, okay, well that's, so I'm kind of the Balthasarian type, and my posture is kind of I would not complain at all if this turned out to be true. I have nothing against. I'm kind of probably my favorite scholar who's studies eschatology but isn't universalist is Jerry Walls. Have you ever heard of him?
Jerry Walls, yes. Mm-hmm.
He's so charming. Definitely a quirky fellow. I would have some pretty strong disagreements with him. Certainly. He actually said on an interview a year ago that he's never been able to make up his mind if he's a classical theist or an open theist.
Oh, interesting.
I did not know that about him. I'm like, I would disagree with you very strongly on that one, Jerry.
Right.
Or Dr. Walls, to be respectful.
Right.
But, he always
Yeah.
like makes a point to say he's team universalism. He's just not convinced yet.
Right.
And that's pretty much me. Like, I hope you guys
Yeah.
turn out to be right.
Yeah. Well, to get to come back to Balthasar, I think he's genuine from everything that I could tell in his writings. I think he's genuine about it. And he reminds me a lot of Metropolitan Callistus Ware, the Orthodox metropolitan who passed away just a few years ago, but that he wrote an essay on Dare We Hope for the Salvation of All. You probably know the essay. It's very worth it. It's a short read, but it is very powerful. And it's very beautiful because he kind of makes the case. He really takes the objections very seriously and kind of outlines them, and then he also outlines the case for universalism, and he kind of lands on kind of like a hopeful universalism. But it's a very honest assessment. It's not polemic, and it's a beautiful essay. I can recommend that for people who haven't read that.
Yeah, I'll be transparent. I've heard of it, but I've never read it. I'll have to make that happen. I really like Ware. Ware was a really remarkable man. It's a very profound loss.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. So I kind of compare him in the sense that he's another kind of important person as a counterpart to Balthasar, kind of contemporary, if you will. I think hopeful universalists, and I think, So what I know, you mentioned Bulgakov before, and you also gain a lot of insight from him. But I want to ask you, like, what would it take for you to become convinced of universalism? What is lacking? Or for instance, if you read Bulgakov and beautiful writing, what is something lacking, for instance, in his writings that you go like, I think you mentioned to me privately something you wrote. Well, I'll believe it if I see it, or something to that effect. I'm really liking this. You're like, I can see your kind of excitement, and then you're like, but so the question that came to my mind was like, well, okay, well, what is it going to take, or what's missing there for you?
And I don't want to be like obtuse or like stubborn. I've already mentioned I basically have diagnosed autism, so I can be a bit that way. But I think for me, there's a lot of things that converge with it, and I think what it would take for me, short of seeing it, because that's kind of a non-answer. I was being cheeky, of course.
Right.
I kind of halfway mean it. It's like when Voltaire was writing letters with a guy who didn't believe that human souls persist after death. Voltaire replied to him. He said, "That sounds very plausible, but I'm still a little bit worried about going there." Right. So he basically said, "I'm not fully covered." And so maybe there's a bit of that going on, where it's just like the world's a bit mysterious place.
Absolutely.
Maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but I like H.P. Lovecraft's fiction, and he has sort of this cosmic horror element to reality, where it's like the unknown. In Christian terms, the unknown is like the Trinity. It's beautiful. It's perfect.
Yes.
But like, I'm other than God. I'm not the Trinity.
Right.
So the idea that there's a layer of like cosmic horror that's not God, but is present. I think that makes sense to me. It may not. It may be one of those like uncomfortable truths, such as sometimes people get ripped to shreds by oceanic white-tip sharks. It's like that's true. I don't like that it's true. It doesn't like. I don't go yippee. Sometimes, but it's like that's a part of the world.
Yes.
So
Yes, it is.
I think to me, what I think I'm missing, if I had a sense that it was like revealed truth, you can't really argue with what God tells you. Like if God says,
right.
"Psych, I'm a universalist," I'll let you guys I let you guys toy.
Yes.
I let you guys toy
Yes.
with the other thing forever just to troll you. You know.
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, you guys go
I'm
figure it
just
out. You know.
I'm being cheeky, but like
No, it's good. It's good stuff.
like I think that another thing that holds me back, and I've actually never seen this addressed, so I'd love
Yeah.
to hear what you think. And not, I haven't seen it addressed, not because I think it's clever or something. It's just a sincere thought I have. But
Yeah.
my understanding is that Origen believed that it was useful for some people to believe in eternal punishment.
Yes.
So if that's a misconception on my part, definitely feel free to correct me in a second. But
Yes.
my question is, if the great divines, some of whom like seem to have been universal themselves, I'd also add like Gregory of Nazianzus' name to that, maybe
Yes.
Maximus the Confessor.
Yes.
Jordan Wood knows Maximus well, and
Yes. Yes.
he's sort of against Brian Daly with Baltasar on the issue of whether Maximus is a universalist. Wood says yes, definitely, and
Yeah.
I like Wood a lot, and I trust him,
Yeah.
so I'm going to trust that take.
Yeah.
But my question is like, if it's okay to believe in it, and I think
Yeah.
that seems to be what Origen, Nazianzus, and Maximus think. Even if it's not their own position, they think it's okay to believe it, which
Yes.
means that they can't see it as that destructive for the average person, at least.
Right. Right.
So I think the idea that we need to, and I don't know that this is what you personally think. I know
Yeah.
someone like, and I like him. I met with him recently, Eric Rayton. He thinks everybody should be universalist. We should just drop the old theory. It's bad.
Yeah. Right.
It sucks.
Yes.
That
Yes.
seems to be Hart's position, although
Yeah.
he has enough realism to admit early in his book he doesn't think he's going to change minds or anything.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Right. Right.
I think he was wrong. I think he did change a lot of
Right.
minds.
Right.
And
I think so too.
I
Yes.
don't lament that. Again, I'm
Right.
not
Right.
like this
Yeah.
Justinian style like
Right. Right. Right.
loather of universalism. I
Right.
mean, I
Right.
don't even see it as like, to me, like the pillars of orthodoxy would be the Trinity and the Incarnation.
Yes.
And I would tend to say any person who is committed to those things
Yeah.
is 95% correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like that other 5%, and I know your answer was that you think a lot of stakes are riding on this.
Yes.
I think you might be right, but I think my question is, how would you engage with Origen or Nazianzen?
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
here in 2026,
Right.
and you have the benefit of like all the development of doctrine. You got
Right.
to read Bulgakov, which is a pleasure that those two never had, of course. And
Right.
Bulgakov
Right.
is
Right.
splendid.
Right.
I'd love to say for all
Yes. Yes.
listeners, I adore
Yes.
Bulgakov. He's one of my life heroes.
Yes.
I think for me, there's just this element of like apophaticism and like the cosmic horror of evil
Yeah.
and sort of the incomprehensibility, not only of God, but in a certain
Right.
way of evil as well.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then also just the fact that some of the divines seem comfortable with the idea that
Right.
many, maybe even most,
Yeah.
uh, average Joe, like working class Christians in history,
Right.
are not going to be universalist, and they don't think they don't to me strike me like they consider that an urgent problem.
Yeah.
So
Well. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm painting a picture,
No.
if I'm
No.
sounding
I
like
think
an idiot or a fool, but
no.
those are
Not at
some big
all.
ones for me,
Not at all.
Robert.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
really grateful you asked. That's really
Yes.
sweet of you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. No. So I think to your first point, I think this is an issue that all believers have to consider, and all people. Just by the very virtue of being in the world, there is darkness. There is evil. There is suffering. There is that, and you cannot deny that. And also for believers, I think, and I've grappled with that, is that I'm speaking as a um, hard universalist, right? A convinced universalist, not just a hopeful, but I truly believe in universalism. But nonetheless, I think we have to understand that as Christians, everything that we believe is just that, it's faith, right? And I'm not saying there's no good reason to believe, but I'm saying at the end of the day, it's not empirical science. It's not looking in a petri dish and observe some some things happening there. I mean, at the end of the day, even things such as the Trinity and things that what you call pillars, rightly so, these are still held in faith. So there was always this element of, well, it may not be true, right? Because we do, but that's the very nature of faith. And I think, and so we have to be willing to consider, and be humble enough to say that this is ultimately, yes, it's a position of faith, and we have to consider that, it may not be true. It may not be true. We have very good reasons, And again, I'm a committed Christian. I'm a convinced universalist. So I'm not saying that lightly, but I am saying it as something that is, I think we have to consider, and we have to be really humble with that. And I think that should keep us from overreaching and bulldozing people, with our position. That this is held in faith. This is held, in that way, a very, very provisional in that sense, So I think even in our conviction of our faith. So I hopefully that answers your first point, right?
No, that's very helpful. I really appreciate that.
There is that horror, there is that darkness, there is that, why is this happening this way? Why, you mentioned somebody, being shredded to pieces by a shark. It's a natural evil. It's, but that's real. It happens, right? So it's not something we can deny. So there is definitely, we kind of live day to day on that kind of edge of destruction. But I think it's one thing to take that and then to conclude from that to say, well, but that's all there is, and these are the eternal purposes that God has then created us for. And I think that's a leap there that I think one can not so easily make. You see what I'm saying? So I think, you know what I mean? So I think your concern, your horror, and your being confronted with this is very real, and it's a common human experience. And I think not to face that is really kind of, just being blind to, to life. So, to your second point, I think there is, yes, I've heard it that pastorally, for pastoral, economically, economic, in the sense of pastorally, that fathers, that even early fathers use this, bishops, pastors, whatnot, to say, well, people are just not ready for universalism. If you just give up this, if you just give up preaching about hellfire and damnation and fear and all of this, then you will lose people, because they just won't have, they won't have a reason to believe and to go through life. But I think ultimately that fails. I think they're wrong. Even apart from the fact, did they really believe that? Did they really teach that? Maybe they were under strictures. Maybe they privately, they, in their counsel to people, we don't know what they said. So Saint Basil, Gregory's brother, said that at one point, he said that the majority of people were universalist, believed in the salvation of all in his lifetime. This is in the late 4th century. So but I think this is kind of more maybe that we don't know that much about, because it may not have been really something that was out in the open. And then it raises the question, why not? Well, I think the bigger question is like, if damnation and the certainty of hell, the eternal hell, was part of dogma, you would see it in the Nicene Creed. You would see it in the in the follow-up councils, but you don't see that. It's not in the councils. And I think that, to me, tells me more that, if for sure, if they thought it was beneficial, that it was not only beneficial but essential, necessary for those in the faith to know the Christian faith correctly, then for sure they would have included that in the dogma, in the Nicene Creed. And you don't see that. And I think, to me, that speaks louder than perhaps what some teachers, some fathers may have taught about, well, we can't really trust them with universalism, therefore let's just tell them the hell is good, and we make this a good teaching. To me, there's not much to it, and I think even if there was, I think they're mistaken about that, because they'd have to go counter to everything that is argued about the Paschal triumph, for instance. I was going to mention that how in the Orthodox liturgy, in the Orthodox experience, the central image, the central icon is the so-called icon of the anastasis, of the resurrection. Actually, the more formal name of that icon is the descent of Christ into Hades, or the harrowing of Hades. The Christ descent into hell. It's the iconic icon of Christ standing over the abyss, and in it you see the broken gates, the demolished gates and locks and keys. You'll see them in this abyss. It's broken, and then Christ triumphantly stands there in white, all bright, and he hands out, he has Adam and he has Eve, and he pulls them out of hell, out of Hades, and that's the anastasis. That is the central image. That is the Paschal triumph. That is the good news. And so I think that if one were teaching some kind of it's beneficial to tell people that they can end up in hell eternally, then you would have to go counter to these to this kind of central teaching of Christ trampling down death by death. And so I think it's just, I don't think it's tenable to it's not coherent in the longer tradition to use that as a way of saying, well, see, therefore it's okay to teach contrary to Christ's triumph. So I think it's just again, and it's not to deny that there are not fathers, that there is not a tradition within the tradition that is distinctly promoting or accepting of eternal damnation. There's definitely that. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. So again, just to underline, I don't mean to say that orthodoxy means that if you're Orthodox, okay, you're a Universalist. That's not the case. But yeah. So I think both points are really good. I think they're genuine concerns. They're genuine concerns. So, and they're important. They're not something to just trivially, just to kind of, let's just push it aside. I think if you hear a pattern here is that I don't know of any Universalist who deny the existence of hell, for instance, or who say, well, it's just, suffering evil. That's just not, just get on with the show. There's nobody that I know that's Universalist believes that. So I think you see that in Hart's, that all shall be saved. He also takes that very seriously. So it's by no means some kind of pushing aside of the concerns, of evil and suffering and that type of thing, So, yeah.
I agree, and I really appreciate your generosity to my scruples. This is a topic that greatly interests me, and I'm sure my studies aren't over. So maybe I'll arrive on the correct side of the debate eventually.
Right. Well, the thing with Bulgakov, for instance, and with Nis as well, is like you kind of have to sit with him. You kind of have to go along with them, if you will, and kind of catch their, kind of get a good view of their vision. And because it's not just these narrow points about this or that, the other, it's like a larger vision of creation, of God, and the meaning of all this, and how we fit into this, and the larger meaning of it all. And you kind of have to sit with that. And I think it's very easy to kind of get really kind of taken by perhaps a few little issues here and there. Not that they're not important, but it's easy to lose sight of the larger picture, I think. And I think if we do that, I think we will really miss out, and I think with Bulgakov, again, another one of those sweeping theologians who makes this vision is so grand and beautiful, that how can you have to just sit with that and let it absorb. The interesting thing about Father Bulgakov, it is said that he celebrated the liturgy on a daily basis. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but he was very devout as a priest. And so to me, that speaks volumes, because it tells me that it wasn't just head knowledge. It wasn't just a theory. He absorbed it through the liturgy, through the Eucharist, through being faithful in that, through being in the Holy of Holies, if you will, and also letting himself, be part of that. So I think I cannot imagine talking just theory here. Universalism, Christianity in general, it has to be a lived experience. It has to be something that, like Greg even said, it has to be something that catches you, that changes you, because otherwise it's just, what is it? Is it just a series of a set of beliefs or something? I would say, who cares? I really don't care. It's about meeting the living God is really what it's about, in my opinion. And that's why I think we need to set aside polemics and these kind of things. I know the topic about the reunification of Catholicism and Orthodoxy, I know you brought it up as a possible topic to talk about. Well, I think that is a great segue into this, is to say, let's revisit that. Let's look at that. Let's put aside our divisions. If it's possible, I don't know, but I think we must, at least in good faith, we must look at that and say, well, what keeps us apart? What is holding us back? And even if it doesn't result in a unification, perhaps it can mean a sharing of communion, right? That is, and perhaps that's maybe even a better vision. Not reunification, perhaps, but that we commune together. And to me, that seems more of a more likely, more realistic scenario, in the sense that I think that I think both the East and the West have to see each other as equals. And that for Rome, no doubt means a demotion. I realize. So it's easy, one could say, well, it's easy for you to say, you're Orthodox, you don't have to give up Rome, but no, really, I'm not calling Rome to give up Rome. So I mean, it is, even from the Orthodox perspective, it is a patriarchate. It is legit. So I think that can be kind of a point of kind of reconciliation, a point of saying, well, how could Rome and the Eastern patriarchates, how could they be in communion? It's a tall order, of course. I understand.
It's If I may interject, you
Yeah.
said it would be a demotion for Rome. I'll just express my sense. I'm not so sure about that.
Okay.
I think it'd
Yeah.
probably be a promotion for us.
Well, yeah, depending of, but I what I meant is that it would mean giving papal universal jurisdiction, and
Yes, exactly. I knew what you meant. I was being
yeah,
cheeky.
right. So, but yeah, and look, it could even there's a there is it could mean division on the East, and any kind of ecumenism, is by many in the East is seen as compromising and all. I'm not calling for compromise. I don't think Rome should compromise. I don't think the East should compromise. I think compromise that's not what this is about. Right. It is not about, can we find some kind of political compromise that we can just, say, let's just bygones be bygones and pretend to everything, and compromise on these issues. No, I don't think so. It has to be a real meeting of the minds, a real meeting of the hearts, and that's why I think conversations and dialogue are so important. But there's a real fear, I'm sure, on both sides, that this means compromise. It means watering down, doctrine and these kind of things and practices and that type of thing. And with all the history and the animosity between the East and the West, it's no small thing. And we cannot be under the mistaken belief that somehow we could just, kind of use, no big deal. That's just not the case. But I think I'm all for, and I think it starts with with us. It starts with just tone down the polemics. Let's not see each other as you, me against each other. Look at our divisions, and that these things are just, it's just leads to no good. And I think it only hardens the divisions. It only blinds us, really, I think, to our own shortcomings, and it blinds us to the good in the other, and it goes counter to the Christian vision, all in all ways.
Yeah, it really can seem that way at times.
Yeah.
Well, I've kept you a long time, Robert. Do you want to?
Great discussion.
Do you want to close with any thoughts, or how would you like to proceed?
Yeah. I mean, do you have any other questions maybe that we haven't talked about? I've got about another 10 minutes here, so yeah, a little over, but perhaps there's something that you wanted to talk about that we didn't already touch on.
Well, I gotta say, when you mentioned Clement of Alexandria, you piqued my curiosity. I don't know as much about him. I know more about Origen and Gregory of Nyssa than I do about Clement.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Did Clement have any bearing on apologeticist discussions?
Yes, he does. He does talk about it, and he does mention it. I think he's not as systematic, more. He's in terms of universal salvation, of the resurrection of all. He is by far not as systematic, as sweeping, if you will, a broad vision of the resurrection of all as Gregory of Nyssa is, for instance. Gregory works this out in a more systematic. I don't want to systematic, be careful, because he's not a systematic theologian, in the modern sense. But that kind of, for Nyssa, it is not. It kind of, universal salvation, the resurrection of all, fits into his theology of creation. It fits into theosis, right? How we are becoming, how we partake of the divine nature, all right? How we participate in God. So it plays a role in many different ways. For Clement of Alexandria, it's kind of more mentioned here and there, and he doesn't really go in depth. And I haven't read him in a while, but that's what I recall. It's just that it's definitely there. It's kind of in seed form, and in that sense, it's kind of beautiful that you already see that, because it is a testament that, hey, this is not totally foreign to the late, what is this, the second century, right? This is so this is early on. We're now just kind of in right around 200 or so, from what I recall, and of course he is in the same school as Origen, and Origen takes it another step. But yeah, again, Nyssa really is the one that kind of connects the dots, as I like to say, and he kind of paints a larger picture, and it's a beautiful picture because it kind of fills it in, what the importance of it, and makes it very clear. So yeah, Clement of Alexandria is a kind of a forgotten person, I think, but kind of overshadowed by Origen, for sure. Of course, Origen is just wrote so much more, and also, Origen comes a little bit later too, so things are changing rapidly around that time, in the Roman Empire, and all this, and all this crazy stuff happening with persecution and all of that. But yeah, it's very worthwhile to read up on Clement of Alexandria, yeah. Let me see if I have any subjects that I want to make sure that we talk about, that I wanted to bring up.
Please do. Yeah. And
yeah,
we can always schedule another time in the future.
Yeah, we'd love to.
I had a good time.
I would love to do that. I'm totally open to that. If you to follow up, Probably would have to be maybe in August, or I've got a travel schedule coming up, so it would have to be later this summer or early fall. But yeah, I think I think it meant. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just
Go
going
ahead.
to ask. You mentioned Jürgen Moltmann's concern about like oppressors, oppressed. Is
Yes,
that
yes.
is that your? Are you partial to that as an objection, or are
Uh,
there other objections to
uh,
universalism that you find more interesting? Because I know, as someone who's not a universalist,
yeah,
there are universalist cases I'm very partial to. I'm very
yeah.
partial to George MacDonald's Sermon Justice, very
Oh,
partial to
yes.
Hart's
Excuse
book,
me.
to
Yes,
Bulgakov's Bride of the Lamb. So
yes.
I have like positions I don't believe, but that I'm
Yeah.
very sympathetic to. So I was curious, is that one by Moltmann the one that you find the most sympathy for, or are there others?
Well, I think the case is a fictional case of Ivan, in the Brother Karamazov, by Dostoevsky. I think is this, yeah, and I just recently wrote an essay on that. It can be, you can look me up on Substack. Maybe you've read it. It's "Returning the Ticket" is the title of the
No, I
essay.
haven't read it yet. I'll check it
Yeah,
out.
it's and that really speaks to me, because again, it really grapples Dostoevsky through Ivan. He just wrestles with that question of how could God allow this, and Ivan comes up with the most, as a good journalist, if you will, he makes a list of, let me come up with the worst, and he comes up with the children who suffer, innocent children, right? One of is a girl who is by her parents is confined and horribly treated. She lives in her excrement. It's just horrible. And the other one is the little boy who gets for no good reason, right? There's no good reason for these. There's no justification for these cases. The little boy gets torn apart by the hounds, because his father, I think it was his father, who's a servant to the Lord, who has these these hunting dogs, and made an innocent mistake, and the boy has to pay for it and gets killed, gets eaten alive by these dogs, right? And so Ivan is saying, what kind of God is this? What purpose is there for this? And if this fits in some kind of larger scheme of God bringing about some greater good, then I don't want to have anything to do with this kind of God. He says, I'm returning my ticket. This if we earlier talked about the moral character of God. Well, Ivan is saying, if this is what God is like, then I'm returning my ticket. I cannot accept that there is any good reason, mortal or divine, that an innocent child has to suffer so that there can come about some greater good. And I think that to me, you asked me like what criticism or what objections engage me, and I think that one is quite profound. It's quite deep, because it just and we see examples of this innocent suffering, unnecessary, and you ask yourself, what greater good could there be? And so my essay, I attempt to wrestle with that, and it's actually also, I talk about theodicy, right? The theodicy being the attempt to justify God in the to give an account for evil, for the existence of evil. And I don't want to give away the whole punchline, but I think it's a failed project. That theodicy fails. So, but anyways, but so I think that is such. Dostoevsky puts this. His writing is so superb, because you read that and you just, and this is a fictional character, right? This is all fiction, but you read that and go like, yes, a child suffering for no good reason. They had absolutely there's no justification whatsoever. They didn't do anything. And what is their guilt? They were born in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this supposedly has to bring about some greater good that heaven knows what may be. Well, if that is God, then I don't want anything to do with it. And I agree with it. If that is true, then that's the kind of God that we don't want to have anything to do with it ever. And so I think he's right. Now, where Ivan goes off the rails, so to speak, is that then he basically denies God. And I think there's a great counterpoint in Job, right? The biblical figure of Job, the biblical person of Job, where he also kind of goes through this innocent suffering, but it ends differently for him. And so I think there is some parallels there, and some great takeaways. Ivan just it just collapses into denial of God, and Dostoevsky doesn't quite bring it out, but it's not like is Ivan an atheist, or what happens exactly we don't know, but the point is that this is just such it just grabs you by the collar and say, pay attention here, folks. This is a real issue. Yes, so that's, I think, is a very, very powerful objection to not just universalism, but Christianity. Really think about it. But I think with the question unresolved about the eternal forever type of destination of creation, I think heightens the stakes and makes that question of theodicy and the question of justification of innocent suffering all the more poignant and all the more critical to answer and to face. And but because again, if one says, well, there is eternal damnation, then now we permanently, without any hope of breaking out of this, we permanently then lock this wound, right? This suffering. We then, even both for the victims and the perpetrators, we lock that in. There's no resolution. And I think that's a real problem. I think that's a real problem, that now it's like we end up establishing a dualism. You have God here that's good, we say, and then we have evil, well, that endures. Somehow God, sustains evil to into eternity permanently. And then we see that hell, then it turns out, is not purgative. It is not a place of healing. There is actually no purpose to hell other than retribution, other than a hopeless place of punishment, right? And so I think, and so when we bring up Moltmann, who brings up the case of well, universalism, wouldn't that re-victimize the victims, because now they have to face the salvation of those who victimize them, right? Great point. But I think we can see that if it's not resolved, that if the evil somehow eternally endures and there's no way of getting out of that, it's a hopeless case, then we have then written that into eternity. We have made it permanent. What is temporary, right, in this time and this life, now we have actually made permanent. And I think that only aggravates the issue of suffering. It makes it even sharper. It makes it even more intolerable. And then also we have to ask ourselves, does it vacate the meaning of good, of the moral character of God? Can we really say that type of God, that is really, do we call that good? Is that is God really good? So that are some of the problems that I think that arise, that if we accept eternal damnation, these questions about the meaning of good, right? It's now we have to say, well, maybe he's not the ultimate good, and that's, those coming back to the early on, we talked about what is at stake. Well, I think that's one of those things that is at stake, so.
Yes, that's very well put. It makes me think of, Hart wrote an essay that I really liked in reply to reviews, where he basically said, people complain about my tone, David Hart's tone.
Yes,
like,
yes.
I don't think I should have ever had to write this book. If we want people to be embarrassed, I want my opponents to feel the burden of truth, to feel a sense of reticence. And I just want to say, for whatever it's worth, I actually completely agree with that. Like, even not being on Hart's team, I'm like, yeah, I think I should carry a kind of tentativeness and respectfulness and a calm tone towards opponents, and not necessarily expect to receive it in return just because of the stakes is what we're talking about.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's just been a great conversation, and I hope it's been beneficial. I enjoy it. I in talking with you, hearing your questions, hearing your your insight and observations, and your story, about this, and your honesty about, not feeling like you can quite, embrace, universalism, but that's quite all right. That this is, you love God, and this is a journey. It's a forever stretching forth, and so I think this is wonderful. And if you would like to do a follow-up, I'm open to that, and maybe viewers will have questions, or you yourself will have other questions. Don't know if I can always answer the questions rightly, but certainly we will give it my best effort. And for those who like to read more about my essays and whatnot, it's Substack. Just look up my name. You'll find me, and also on Eclectic Orthodoxy as well. I'm a contributing editor there, and I'm also a frequent. I frequent the com box. I oftentimes will spend time to respond to questions and things like that. So yeah, that's how I learn. I learn by questions and answering and engaging in dialogue, and I love it.
That's wonderful, and that's really come through in our conversation. For whatever it's worth, I certainly would love to visit with you in the future.
Let's do that.
And yeah, I think,
be my pleasure.
Like you said, the stakes are very high, and it's an interesting topic. So
it sure is. It
can't be solved over one call.
No,
that's for sure.
That's right. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Yes.
I'll talk to you later, Robert. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Okay,
right.
great. Thanks. Bye. Thank you.